Call the meeting to order, regular meeting of the MWPA Board of Directors for April 20th, 2023. And just mention that Claire, Mark, and Rachel are not attending today and have notified us they won't attend. But I don't believe we have anyone online that wants to be hybrid as part of the board. So we'll do voice votes and be clear to the secretary of those votes. Roll call, please, Martina.
Certainly. Thank you. So we have already for Bolinas Fire District, Claire Molesworth is absent. Stephen Burke of Mill Valley.
Present.
We also have Rachel Kurtz of Sanderville absent. Gabe Paulson of City of Larkspur should be joining us in about 5 to 10 minutes. Catherine Donahue of Inverness here. Barry Evergettis of Kenfield. Bill Shea of Marinwood. Paul Jeschke of Muir Beach, I actually also believe will not be here for this meeting. Bruce Goins from Novato.
Here.
Tom Finn of Sleepy Hollow. Here. Catherine Hilliard for Southern Marin Fire. And I do believe she'll be joining us in just a little bit. Mark Wykes for Stinson Beach. Looks like he is also absent at the moment. Fred Casisa for Town of Corte Madera. Not here yet. Barbara Kohler for Town of Fairfax.
Here.
Alexis Feynman for the Town of San Anselmo.
Here.
And I do want to state for the record that Catherine Hilliard for Southern Marin just joined us. Director McMillan for Town of Ross.
Here.
And President Rodoni for the County of Marin.
Here. Thank you, Martina. Item 3 is agenda of adjustments. Would anyone like to suggest any adjustments to the agenda? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to item 4, which is open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the board of directors at this time on matters not on the agenda that were within the jurisdiction of the board. Please be advised that pursuant to the government code, the board is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please remember to silence your phones or devices and mute your microphones when not reporting out. Anyone in the board chamber here wish to address the board as public open time item not on the agenda? All right, Martina, can we go online, please?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the open time for public expression, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, we do not have any hands for public comment at this time.
Thank you. This takes us to item 5, which is the executive officer's report. In Mark Brown's absence, Ann Krelock will give us the report today.
Thank you. And while I share my screen, let's see. I'll just note that Mark Brown is on a fantastic vacation right now, so I'm excited for him to take a little time away. Great. So this will be brief because we do have a lot to discuss today. You know, as many of you have seen, there have been some articles about the past rainy season and whether or not there are any implications for the upcoming fire season. This is a screenshot from a Bloomberg article highlighting that fire officials around the state are a little nervous about the coming fire season. California saw drought-busting rain this winter. And while that was great news in terms of water supply, it could also be a bit concerning for the next fire season. We've seen that before. In the 2016-2017 winter, we had quite a good rainfall amount and another drought-busting rainfall and a pretty nasty fire season in 2017, as you know. So while we have no interest in fear-mongering on this topic, we're also going to be watching conditions carefully. It's likely that this wet winter delays fire season at least a bit, although the fine fuels will dry out quickly in the summer. But the fire season will depend on the fall winds and the start of the next rainy season. So if the start of the next rainy season is delayed and we get a lot of very strong northerly winds, we could be seeing a pretty extreme fire season. So we'll continue doing our bit to make Marin a more fire resilient county, and we will keep an eye on the conditions as they evolve. So second, the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. This is Governor Gavin Newsom's task force that he created to further efforts to prevent catastrophic wildfires by creating healthier, more sustainable natural environments. The governor's task force meets periodically around the state and includes a range of experts to discuss and kind of think about all of these different issues. The May meeting focuses on the Central Coast, and MWPA has been invited to both participate in a panel discussion and also host a field trip. So I'll be on the panel discussion on May 11th. The topic will be from local collaboration to regional action, and we'll be hosting a field trip to the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break on May 12th. And that's it for that report.
Thank you, Ann. I just want to do a mic check. I understand my mic had a lot of feedback. Is that better?
Is it on right now?
Yes, I am.
Seems okay to me. I don't hear the crowd.
Okay, thank you. So take questions for Ann on the executive officer's report. Catherine.
Thank you, Anne, for that. Couple of questions. There has been press about the snowpack and flooding, et cetera, especially in those areas where the wildfires were before. Do we have any risk for that in Marin County?
So are we talking about post-fire hazards such as landslides? And yes, absolutely. So in the Sierras and in many other places around the state, post-fire hazards are a really important topic that we need to dive into. We need to think about for Marin County as well. So once the landscape has burned at a high severity, you can end up with hydrophobic soils. You can see a pretty dead seed bank, so you're not seeing a lot of regrowth. With all of this water and snow on the landscape, it can lead to a lot of runoff and a lot of movement of soil and hillsides. We saw that certainly in Southern California in recent years. We've seen that a little bit here and there in Sonoma County. The soils are different, the geology is a little bit different, but it's a very important consideration, especially with steep slopes, and Marin County is full of areas with steep slopes. So I think that's a consideration for us going forward as well.
So are we doing anything proactively to address that? Any strategies at this point or not yet?
You know, that's a really timely question. When I was working in Sonoma County, I helped work on post-fire kind of hazard mitigation after a couple of fires in 2020. And a colleague of mine at the time worked on post-fire hazards after the 2017 fires. We've discussed this issue in terms of Marin County, Sonoma County. I've talked about this issue with Daniel Swain previously also. In Sonoma County, there was a great effort afterwards to model the potential for landslides and to incorporate that into recovery planning documents. I think that's something to explore maybe proactively in Marin County, and just by coincidence brought this topic up to somebody yesterday. So it's something that we're thinking about certainly, especially with extreme weather events like the atmospheric rivers we saw last winter.
Thank you. And then the second question was this panel that you're going to be on, which is great. Is that open to the public or?
That's open to anyone who registers for the event.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I would just add to Ann's comment, the Office of Emergency Management has all kinds of post-event plans.
Mhm.
Some of them are being updated right now through the hazard mitigation conversation they're having. It's a 5-year update of those plans. So if you want to check with the OEM, Office of Emergency Management, there's probably information about that because it actually is a scope that's probably well beyond our scope here, although we have to maintain our projects after we actually complete our work in a safe manner for flooding and water runoff and stuff. So, but there's a bigger group working on that countywide. So, yeah. Any other questions for Ann?
And I'll just add that in addition to that coordination with the Office of Emergency Management, Mark Brown has been discussing this sort of hazard and better prediction for this sort of hazard with the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. So there are a lot of great experts starting this conversation.
Other questions of Ann on the Executive Director's report? All right, we're going to go to public on the Executive Officer report.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the executive officer's report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those of you joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. And sir, there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the board for any further discussion. There's no action required. All right, looks like we move on to item 6, which is our consent calendar. The opportunity for public comment on the consent calendar items will occur prior to the board's discussion of the consent calendar. The board may approve the entire consent calendar with one action. Any alternative items on the consent calendar may be removed by any board member or staff member for separate discussion and vote. I'll take public comment on the consent calendar now, which has 2 items: minutes and acknowledgement of environmental compliance for the San Rafael Fire Zone Road Vegetation Clearance Phase 2 project.
And if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the consent calendar item, please raise your hand in the reactions by pressing *9 if you're joining us by phone. And sir, there are no hands for comment.
Very good. Does any of the board or staff want to pull an item from the consent calendar? All right, could I have a motion then for items A and B on the consent calendar?
I'll move that, Barbara Kohler.
Thank you. Okay, it's moved by Barbara Kohler, second by Evergettis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain. Just to show the record, it's a unanimous voice vote. Thank you. Item number 7 is staff reports, the first being the finance report.
And Sarah Lisa should be joining us in just a moment to deliver the finance report. She will be joining us virtually.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. I don't have anything new to add to my written report, but I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Questions? Yes, Catherine.
Hi, Elisa. So you have that we are at 59% on administrative costs, and there are some highlighted in red. Can you explain a little bit about how
Definitely.
usually there are explanations as to why we're either over or under?
Oh, okay. Well, just first, I'll call your attention to the note at the end where it says that they're highlighted in red if they're higher than where we project we'd be to date at this time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to finish over budget. They might be exactly where they need to be. For example, under administrative costs, the financial and admin services is at 100%, so it's red, but that's just a one-time payment and that will be fine. As for, and so some of them might be in that same situation, which I think they are, like under the core program. I know that Executive Officer Brown is aware about the website portal being at 82%. And so I think he's keeping tabs on those. As for the other ones, like the core project, the DSpace evaluations at 96%, I'm not really sure why that's over, but agencies do get bi-weekly reports as to the status of their projects. And if they go over on a certain project, they can use funding from another one that's underspent. So what I'm saying there is I think they've got tabs on it as far as the core program goes. Does that help?
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions about the treasurer's report? All right, we can go to the public then to see if anyone, members of the public, I don't see anyone here. Anyone online?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the finance report, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 if you're joining us by phone. And sir, there are no hands.
All right, bring it back to the board for any further discussion. There's no action required on this item. All right, we're moving on to 7B, work plan implementation update. Ann?
Great. Okay. So I'll be covering a few topics today. First, I'd like to give you an update regarding our list of qualified contractors that we've been working on for now several months. And this is an optional list that member agencies can use when they're implementing core vegetation management projects. It's especially useful for some of those smaller projects under 200,000, and it really streamlines the contracting process if they would like to use this process. We circulated a questionnaire to every contractor we knew of, and we circulated that to member agencies as well to make sure as many contractors out there as possible knew about this opportunity. And now we have a list of 25 to 30 contractors that can be utilized for a more streamlined contracting process. So if any member agencies would like to know more about that, please get in contact and we're happy to talk more about it. And as you know, we've been looking for a GIS contractor to help us build a GIS program for the MWPA. As you know, a lot of what we do has a very strong spatial component. We collect a lot of data related to project implementation around Marin County, and we rely on studies and LiDAR data and all sorts of collaboration that involves all this great data. So we are building a program within the MWPA to handle that, to track projects, to report out on our metrics. And we went through an RFP process. We got a really great suite of contractors applying. Our team internally, which included a member of Marin Map and others, scored all the proposals and then went through a process of interviewing the top 4 candidates. And now we're working with what we think is our top candidate on a potential contract. And so hopefully you'll be seeing that in May. And then I wanted to highlight a few things about the Chipper Day program. Signups for the 2023 season started March 15th. The season starts May 15th. The 2023 program is restructured a bit to allow for some more flexibility for residents to sign up. So this year, each zone will see 5 one-week-long round of chipping, and then rounds, plural, of chipping. And then previous years, it was structured a little bit differently. So we had 2 two-week-long rounds of chipping in each zone. Plus, last year, you might recall that we added another round at the end to reach each of those 5 zones. So we're also adding a large pile pickup service that's also free, and that uses Fire Foundry crews. And then also new this year, we'll be offering lawn signs to residents who use this service. And we have a few here today if anybody would like to take some home. I added a little fun fact here at the end of the slide, and that is that we've only reached under 8% of the residents in Marin County. So there's still a lot of potential need out there and a lot of room to grow for this program. And then regarding the resident grant program, we've distributed over $700,000 in this fiscal year for home hardening and defensible space around all 5 zones. And then new for next year, we'll be offering lawn signs for this program as well. So if you receive a grant, you can advertise the service on your front lawn. A few fun facts about this includes, so the number 140, that's the number of homes where hazardous trees overhanging homes were limbed up. 126 is the number of homes with fire-safe vents that have now been installed. 92 is the number of homes where a cypress or juniper has been removed. 76, the number of homes where gutter guards were installed. And 63, number of homes where bamboo was removed. There are all sorts of other activities that have taken place under this program, but I wanted to highlight at least a few. We've also been working on sharing all this great technical knowledge that we have access to through our contractors, our consultants, with our member agencies. So you might recall in February, I hosted a workshop with member agency staff on erosion and slope stability with a geologist to talk through questions, how to look for risk, you know, what we're doing now to make sure that our projects are considering that risk as we move forward. And then we hosted in April a field skills refresher course. And in this course, we met out in the field. We had several member agencies participating, and we went through and learned all about nesting birds, what to be looking for, what our procedures are. We learned about what plants might be occurring in project areas. And we also talked about riparian resources and regulatory considerations there. So we'll be continuing this type of outreach with member agencies as we go to make sure, as we, you know, work with our member agencies, we're expecting a lot of that staff of, you know, fire agency staff moving into the environmental planning arena. So we want to provide those tools and those resources to make sure they're successful. We have a field trip coming up in Marin City. That is April 26th, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we hope you all will join us. This has been rescheduled a few times because of rain, those atmospheric rivers we talked about earlier. We're going to be joined by the Marin Housing Authority because this project directly benefits a lot of low-income housing. So it's a really important project. We'll be hosting, along with Marin County Fire and our good friends with the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. We'll be meeting at the end of Donahue Street in Marin City. So please contact me if you need additional information. This is also a good one if you are not a hiker. We plan on hanging out in at the end of the street in paved areas. So it should be ADA accessible. So anyone who is not looking for a hike that day, come and join, and then we can do a little walking afterwards if you're interested. We are working very hard on the 23-24 work plan and budget. A lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, a lot of coordination. We're really excited to be moving this forward and expect to see it on the board agenda in May. You'll hear more from the chair and vice chair, or the chair of each, the advisory technical committee and operations committee later. So I won't go into too much detail on this, but generally, in March, we really dove into, in our public meetings, JPA-wide proposals. In April, we've been really diving into the zone-specific proposals. The Advisory Technical Committee is done meeting for the season, passed off the draft work plan and budget to the Operations Committee, who will be meeting again March 3rd to discuss. And then on my last slide, I just want to show you kind of where we are, or where we will be at the end of this meeting, fingers crossed, in terms of our kind of statistics. Over 566 miles that are ready to be treated in terms of roadside evacuation or vegetation management along roads on evacuation routes. And then in terms of acreage, aside from roadside miles, shaded fuel breaks, prescribed herbivory, we're at over 6,000 acres if the Greater Nevada Shaded Fuel Break moves forward. And then in terms of fire roads, we're at nearly 16 miles. Just a note, we're reaching out to various residents along the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, as well as the Greater Nevada Shaded Fuel Break, to make sure we're able to do all of the resource surveys that need to happen, and then for future implementation. So some of those residents may be receiving mail and maybe a knock on the door. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Ann. So questions of Ann. Barbara.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Great work. And I think this was asked by Catherine last month. The table that you have that shows CEQA complete, and I'm wondering, would it be a lot of trouble to add a column and show sort of percentage complete of those projects, or is that something you don't readily have and you wait till you get reports?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in our last board meeting, I included kind of a start to those data. And I do have some data that I could share with you offline, the rest of the board as well. I think it'll be a lot easier to report on that once we have a GIS program in place and show visuals and really report on those metrics in a more efficient way. But I do have some tables in terms of acres complete for each of the projects now that I could share and potentially share in the next board meeting if you're interested.
I think that would be helpful if you can, but I think I'm just asking things, where you have CEQA complete and not necessarily even the number of roads and all that, because I think that's a lot of work and we will have an annual report, but maybe something like 10% complete, 20% complete. If that's not, a big burden to add, because I like to see that the CEQA is complete, but I have no real clue on where we are on the project. So if it's at all doable, but I totally understand you're overworked and probably this is reaching out to a lot of the different project people. So not necessary if it's not doable. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to add that with the caveat that it may be out of date quickly once each kind of work season gets underway.
Thank you.
Other questions of Ann? All right, we go to the public now. I don't see anyone here in the chamber. Martina, anyone online?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 if you're joining us by phone. And sir, there are no hands, and I did want to go ahead and just advise that Director Paulson is with us now.
Thank you, Martina. So we'll move on to item 8, which is action items. Item 8A, the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break Project. And Ann will kick this off. Very exciting and important project for the community of Novato. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'm going to share my slides here. Great. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon. We're going to take the next several minutes to describe a project in the Novato zone that's on the agenda today for board consideration and potential approval. The Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break is really an example of why Measure C was passed. This one project has the potential to reduce risk to thousands of households in a way that balances ecological stewardship and fire risk reduction. So it takes a team to work on a project like this. So I'm joined by Mike Swayze with Novato Fire and Emily Capello with Panorama Environmental, and we're all three going to be presenting to you today. So today we'll provide an overview of the project and its purpose. We'll talk about how modeling and data was used to help design the project. We'll provide an overview of the environmental compliance process. We'll talk about our outreach to the public. And we'll discuss the results of the environmental compliance documentation, the analysis, future outreach and next steps, and then we'll end with the staff recommendation for MWPA board action. Mike Swayze is going to provide an overview of the project and discuss its purpose.
Thanks, Ann. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. This is a culmination of a big effort. As Ann noted, it was a team effort. I really want to recognize the consulting team, Panorama, Vibrant Planet, Sequoia, that does the biological effort. I've been in this business a long time, have done plans like this, and this is a really top-notch team. Not only did a really good job of putting together the plan, but got it together in record time. So there's a lot of complexity here. We're just going to kind of give you an overview. This is a core proposal for Novato zone. It's really about developing the long-term plan. I call it the blueprint for most of the work that we're doing in Novato going forward. So it's essentially developing a shaded fuel break around the entire Novato community. And in that shaded fuel break, we're really looking to restore the conditions that existed on the landscape as best we can that mimic what was here when there was more frequent fire, a more fire resilient landscape, one that's actually in a much healthier environmental condition. So we're doing that, as you know, by removing ground fuels, limbing up from low, addressing ladder fuels, reducing the amount of invasive species. And we say this a lot. Most of the fuel that we're removing are non-native plants. And so just that addition by subtraction is a good thing for the environment and for wildfire protection. So design vegetation. So yeah, here's the goals really is to develop a plan that really provides the information that we need for implementation. And I think we've been really successful there. And then to have a really strong compliance document that allows us to move forward with ensuring that we're doing the best we can environmentally. So here's the map of the project. The red is the fuel break. It's about 300 feet buffer around the developed areas. And there's also, it's about 60 miles long. And then the yellow areas are areas that are more kind of broad areas where there's properties with large land holdings, big parcels, instead of, the more compact community that we see elsewhere in Novato. So it gives us some room to a broader brush to work with in those areas. And in some of those yellow areas also, we want to do more extensive treatment than the 300 feet for other strategic reasons. So we worked with Panorama and Vibrant Planet to, lay out the fuel break. It was an iterative process. In some cases, we went parcel by parcel. I think we had about 4 passes at the map. I think it's pretty good. I think it's kind of a tight fit for what we wanted to accomplish. This gives you a little bit more of information about the dimensions of the project, although we evaluated up to 300 feet. And in most cases, we're not going to go beyond 200 feet because that may not be necessary, but the environmental compliance allows us to go to the full 300 feet if the conditions warrant it. So we're looking at between the fuel break, the red area, and the yellow WUI fuel reduction treatments, we're looking at over 3,400 acres. So most of that work is going to be done by handwork. Similar to the Ross Valley project, we don't have very great access. We have to go around communities, find alleys to get material out. Where we don't have access, we may employ pile burning. There's, in addition to that kind of mechanical treatment, there's a few areas where we're able to use heavy equipment. We're looking at prescribed burning, mostly pile burning, but we do have laid out here. If you see that the yellow box, that's the ridge between Marin Valley and Novato and St. Vincent's and San Rafael. So this is kind of a joint project where we're looking at doing prescribed burn in a woodland area. You can see that we evaluated that entire yellow area to the south of the fuel break for prescribed burning, but the actual fuel break prescribed burn plots are identified in those smaller polygons. So all of that work needs handwork before we can put fire on the ground. So there's a lot of work kind of embedded in that area. Also, it's good to note that some areas aren't accessible because of the steepness, even for goats and sure-footed humans. So we won't be able to get to those. And then there's some areas that just don't need treatment. They're already being done by good citizens in Novato, or they're rocky areas where there's really no fuel. So the entire footprint, that 3,400 acres, is likely going to be, when I get to implementation, will be less. So right now we're beginning to put together the really site specific prescriptions for the work within the project area. This is Emily's.
Hey, everyone. I'm going to speak a little bit about the modeling, which really fed into the project description that was analyzed in the project specific analysis. So as Mike had mentioned, we took the original fuel break that he provided, and we worked with it. We realigned it with aerial imagery to best match the building footprints, so that we could have the fuel break be as effective as possible. The next step was to divide the fuel break into many different segments or polygons, and these represented sort of the potential forest health treatment units based on the vegetation and the field conditions in each one of those different segments or polygons. And the fuel break was really divided into hundreds of different segments using this information. Vibrant Planet then applied a rule set to best come up with a treatment that was suitable for that vegetation and for that polygon. And they used many different conditions to come up with this treatment, which related to ownership, slope, the vegetation characteristics, and other modeling attributes, which they were able to then apply to each of the segments. Once they'd come up with a vegetation treatment, they looked at how those treatments would impact fire behavior to be able to understand how well each of those treatments would work. And then based on that, they assigned primary and secondary treatments along with the estimated costs for each of those primary and secondary treatments. And then this data was reviewed and revised a couple different times, including discussions with MWPA and also with Novato Fire. And finally, once we had those treatments and those costs, they were then prioritized, and this prioritization was really based on how well each of the treatment addressed the fire hazard and where you would get the most improvement in the fire behavior based on the work effort undertaken. So really that was kind of like looking at where'd you get the best bang for your buck from the different treatments. And then the segments were grouped together into some logical successive areas to be able to show where might be the best places to start when you work into the implementation piece of it. Next slide. So this slide really looks at the different types of work that were modeled and what came out of the modeling. And you can kind of see in the image all of the different polygons that were assigned treatments. So the bulk of it is, as Mike has already said, were really hand thinning of variable density, where your goal is to really mimic the vegetation structure patterns that would exist in a kind of more natural fire regime. And that ended up being about 60% of the overall fuel break. We then also had a fair amount of what in the modeling report is called the rearrangement of fine fuels, and really that gets down to mowing. That was about 25% over all of our treatment definitions. There were certain areas where, even though we have a lot of data, the modeling doesn't really come up with a specific treatment. And so those are considered areas where you would definitely want to assess on site. That's about 9%. It might be that there's low cover. It might be that there were riparian areas. For different reasons, you just want to make sure you get boots on the ground, making sure what's happening in those areas. And then there was also some ground-based mechanical work that came out of the modeling. That's about 5%, and that would really target some of the larger woody vegetation. But really, for any of the vegetation type, you'd want to make sure that there's additional field work happening prior to implementation. One thing I just wanted to point out for the treatment definition, and this shows up sort of in some of our acres, is that the modeling looked at a couple different types of treatment, but in addition to hand thinning or mowing, you might end up also using some additional types of vegetation management, such as occasionally herbicides, potentially grazing or herbivory use. And so those acres are kind of aside from the ones that were looked at for either hand thinning or use of mechanical treatments. So that's something I just wanted to point out. Next slide. This slide talks basically about how the prioritization happened once we had completed all of the modeling and got all of the treatments. It was really sort of based on where you would have the best reduction in fire threat risk and community exposure. The results were reviewed after to make sure that we were accounting for any features that the modeling might not take into consideration, specifically water features or certain more fire resilient vegetation types. And then we just wanted to point out that while this is certainly a very useful tool, it's only one tool, and it might be the case that when Novato Fire District goes out and reviews it, some of these areas have already been treated, so they don't need to be treated. Or it might be that for whatever logical reason, it makes more sense to group, say, treatment 1 and 6, because you can follow it more naturally when you're actually completing the work. So that's just something to keep in mind. Mike, I think it's back to you.
So this is, I'm going to run through some examples of some field break work that we've done in the first 2 years in Novato, core funded projects, mostly on City of Novato open space lands that are kind of in the main part of town on the flats, little hill slope project areas, open space areas. So here's an example. Again, we have head high broom or immediately adjacent to homes. You can't see the homes until we remove the broom, but thinning from below, limbing up, removing the broom. Go to the next one. Here's a more urban looking one. The weed here was not broom, it was privet, escape privet from the landscaping into this open area, and masses of blackberry. I think Novato has the best blackberry stands in all of Marin County. Great if you love berries, but it's actually an extreme fire hazard because you have these fuel beds that are up to 10 feet tall with a green canopy and then dead canes underneath. So they go really well. Next one. Again, you can see in the foreground another invasive plant, rock rose, that maybe can't discern it so much, the dark green in the foreground, and then in the middle ground is, yes, more broom. So this is a really nice oak woodland that I think is much more fire hardy, more native cover, and actually better looking. And you should also note that after we implement our work, the sun comes out and the sky is blue. Here's one off of Redwood Boulevard going over a hill in Novato, and you can kind of see the work in action. Yes, again, more just thickets of broom. These are open space areas that haven't been managed ever. So we have a lot of work to do here, but we think we're getting a lot of value for the work. There's one more maybe. Yeah, so here's Marin Valley goat grazing project. You can see it's before and after. It's you can see where we've grazed and where we haven't grazed. There's still good cover on the ground where the goats have been, and you'll notice those sticks there that are in the grazed portion are actually broom plants that are eventually going to wear out the broom in that zone. So that's just some example of what some of the fuel breaks might look like in Novato.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. Before we dive into the document and the analysis itself, I thought I'd give a little overview of the CalVTP, and there's a lot of terminology, a lot of acronyms, a lot of process involved. So thought we'd hit pause for just a moment. So increasing the pace and scale of vegetation management and streamlining environmental compliance to make that happen was a key component of the 2021 California's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan. That the primary tool for helping accomplish that was the California Vegetation Treatment Program, or CalVTP. In December of 2019, the California Board of Forestry approved this program after many, many years of collaboration and negotiation with stakeholders and regulatory agencies and resource agencies. At the same time, they also certified a program EIR, or Environmental Impact Report, for this program. This EIR functions as a kind of an umbrella program EIR, where project proponents can prepare a project-specific analysis, or PSA, or a project-specific analysis and addendum, PSA and addendum, to take advantage of the thorough analysis and of that program EIR and reduce the CEQA process for their own projects. So in order to use the CalVTP program EIR, a project proponent must determine if their project qualifies. California, CAL FIRE has a map showing the geographic areas that are covered by this EIR. These areas are generally the state responsibility areas, but also overlaid with vegetation communities and those considerations to omit some of the lower priority vegetation types, such as wet meadows, marshes, etc. So eligible areas are referred to as the treatable landscape. However, that map also looks a bit like a checkerboard and doesn't include all of the areas that really should be eligible for this program. So state staff really recognized that and ensured that the projects that overlap other eligible areas could also participate. So projects that are located completely within the mapped treatable area can be covered by that PSA. And for projects that also overlap areas that weren't in those polygons, prepare a PSA and addendum. And that's what we have done. And that's what several other project proponents around the state do as well. The CalVTP created some other simplified terminology for the sake of consistency around the state for all the various projects using it. And in some cases, the terms are a little different from the terminology that we use. So we're going to highlight just a few before we move on. For example, the program highlights 3 different treatment types that are eligible, including wildland urban interface, fuel reduction, fuel breaks, and ecological restoration projects. So a wildland urban interface, or WUI fuel reduction project, they're focused on work in WUI designated areas and generally consist of treatments that reduce fuel loads and slow or prevent the spread of fire between wildlands and structures and vice versa. Fuel breaks are strategically placed vegetation treatment areas that actively support fire control activities. Ecological restoration projects generally occur outside of the WUI areas that have, and they're areas that have departed from the natural fire regime as a result of fire exclusion, and really focus on restoring ecosystem processes, conditions, and resiliency. So today's project includes a long linear fuel break, as well as other polygons that supplement that fuel break that we call the WUI fuel reduction area. The CalVTP covers certain types of treatment activities, and these include prescribed burning, which includes pile burning and broadcast burning, manual vegetation treatment, mechanical vegetation treatment, prescribed herbivory, and targeted herbicide use. So those are really the tools in the toolbox that we're playing with as we develop this analysis and write up this document. As a project proponent does the analysis, they need to go through a list of 70 standard project requirements. And basically, it's like a list of best management practices that you then incorporate into your project. So anything that applies to your project, you incorporate into that document. There are also 21 mitigation measures to review, and any that apply to your project, you then incorporate into your document. And there's no wiggle room. You don't get to modify them, to rewrite them. They just are what they are, and you add them to your document. We, as the MWPA, also have our own project design and implementation features. So where they applied, we also added those into the document. So the last thing I'll say on this slide is that really the analysis that you're doing as part of your project-specific analysis is to determine whether or not your project is within the scope of the California Vegetation Treatment Program. So are you doing anything that is above and beyond, any impacts above and beyond what's already analyzed as part of that program EIR? And if not, and you're doing all the analysis and incorporating those standard project requirements and mitigation measures, then you're considered within the scope of that document. And so that's really the point of the analysis there, to make sure you're not adding additional impacts beyond what's considered in the CalVTP. So what we did was prepare a project-specific analysis and addendum under the California Vegetation Treatment Program. This is a simplified process diagram. You'll note an SPR, Standard Project Requirement AD7, and that's an administrative requirement to make sure you're notifying CAL FIRE that you're planning a project and will be preparing a PSA. And there's a requirement to do that, within more than 15 days prior to project approval, and we took care of that back in February. So just reiterating, what we're doing here is finding a within the scope finding. We've incorporated all of the required SPRs and mitigation measures. And one of the streamlining benefits of this process is a reduced requirement for public review. So there's no public review period as there would be for an EIR. We conducted extensive biological resources and cultural resources analysis. Generally, that included a lot of desktop review and some reconnaissance surveys wherever we could. And there will be additional biological resources, especially botanical surveys, before implementation. In terms of cultural resources, there are various requirements here which we complied with, which included a record search and then Native American outreach, et cetera, as part of that process, which was all completed. And then I'm going to hand it over to Emily to discuss really the details of the analysis here.
Thanks, Anne. So as Anne had mentioned, we used the project-specific analysis to look at all of the different resources that are part of the CalVTP programmatic EIR, following their checklist, and just make sure that all of the effects of the Greater Novato project fall within that analysis, and that any of their basically like best management practices, SPRs were considering. So we really wanted to highlight, how is it that we're protecting the resources for this project? How does the CalVTP protect those resources as well? So the next few slides have a lot of text on them. They go through a bunch of different SPRs, but we just wanted to highlight that some of the main things that they're looking at is a lot of training for the workers who are going out into the field to make sure that they know what potential biological resources could be in the area. As Anne had mentioned, while we did do some reconnaissance surveys for the analysis, there are additional surveys that are required prior to folks getting out into the field. There are botanical surveys, as we'll talk about in a little bit on one of the next slides. During nesting bird season, there's additional surveys that are required. So you really need to make sure that once you get out into the field, you know what resources are on the ground and that you're protecting them. And then another big component of the SPRs, which you can see here, is really retaining the habitat function. So while you're doing vegetation management, you're also retaining the function of that habitat and even making it stronger and more resilient. So this is especially the case for sensitive habitats, and there's a lot about riparian habitat, and then there's also a discussion about chaparral habitat on these two slides, or on this slide. Next slide. So this is just another slide with all of the different measures that would be required to be considered. Some additional specifics about what type of surveys you need to do for special status plants or for special status wildlife, and also nursery sites. So depending on the time of year, there are other considerations about what you have to survey. But this also speaks to the need to really try to prevent any spread of pathogens when you're doing your work, or also any spread of invasive plants or noxious weeds. So it's recognizing that when you're doing your work, you could also be introducing something that you don't want to be. So there are definitely standard project requirements regarding those two items as well. And then the last of the 12 biological resources standard protection requirements speak a bit more to grazing or herbivory, and it's talking about needing to make sure that you have wildlife friendly fencing when you're doing that. And then there's another requirement that has to deal with protecting any nesting birds. So there are these 12 biological resource standard protection requirements. But then in addition to that, we just want to hit on some of the mitigation measures that also are required for biological resources. That's the next slide, please. So the way the Cal VTP PIR looked at any impacts is they first considered kind of their best management practices, those SPRs that we looked at as part of the project, and then identified if there were any areas where they still would have remaining impacts, they require some mitigation measures. So in addition to all of the other items that we'll be doing, there's also some mitigation measures for certain areas. And it mostly has to do with special status plants and wildlife, looking at each of the plants that might be within our area and making sure that we're considering whether they need to be avoided entirely because they're that sensitive and you need to have a buffer around them. Or, for example, what we're finding on the Greater Ross Valley is that there are certain seasons where if you avoid that season, such as the flowering season, you could continue to do your work in that area. So it's really asking you to take a hard look at each of these species and make sure that you're taking them into consideration when you're implementing your work. And that's also the case for wildlife species and making sure that if there's anything that needs to be avoided, it's flagged. And then also that you're sort of keeping in mind all that habitat function that you want to maintain, even as you're doing your work. The next few mitigation measures really have to do with targeting sensitive habitat, is, for example, oak woodlands, making sure that those treatments that you're implementing are not changing that habitat, that while you might be enhancing it, you're not changing it and leading to some sort of larger scale habitat change, which is not the goal. And then also there's, protection of wetlands for any work that might have to occur in those areas. And then just making sure that you're keeping nursery habitat as well. So then, just as Anne had mentioned, we wanted to make sure that in addition to all of the requirements that are part of the Cal VTP, we were keeping in mind that MWPA projects themselves have their own list of design and implementation features, and make sure that we weren't missing any of the items or any of the protection that they offer by not looking at them closely. So in the attachment B of the PSA, there is the list of all of the Cal VTP measures that are required, but then there's also a list of the PDIFs that are required. And what we wanted to do to avoid having duplication is we did a comparison to make sure that if there's a Cal VTP measure that takes care of what the PDIF would do, then people know that and you don't have to be trying to do something twice in the same area. But where there were PDIFs that might not have been considered in the Cal VTP, just because the Cal VTP looked at all of California, whereas MWPA's design and implementation features really look at Marin, that we made sure to call those out as well, just so that nothing would be missed. So the ones that you see on the screen are really dealing with the northern spotted owl, specifically to Marin, and making sure also that any of the wood rat nests are retained. So those would also be implemented. Some other measures that we wanted to highlight that are very important, in particular, we're thinking a lot about them this year with all of the rains that we had, was just that we took a hard look at any potential erosion concerns. There are a fair amount of SPRs that really look at precipitation and needing to stop certain activities depending on precipitation. You're also looking at sort of the weight of vehicles on any wet soils, considering the need to stabilize disturbed soils if there is going to be a rain event in the future. There's a lot of erosion monitoring needed, and that's something that we found a lot this year during implementation of the Greater Ross Valley one, is that we had folks going out and making sure that there wasn't erosion happening at areas that work had occurred. Another thing that is important to always take into consideration, and that was kind of talked about a little bit earlier, was just making sure that you're aware of any of the steep slopes and unstable soils that might be happening around your project. And so getting an extra set of eyes out there prior to doing that work to make sure that the vegetation treatment that you're planning is appropriate for those soils. This slide has a lot of information, but we really wanted to just point out that there in the CalVTP PIR, they did identify some significant and unavoidable impacts, and they were related to air quality and greenhouse gas. So there are 4 impacts that the CalVTP was not able to mitigate fully. And so we looked at each of those for our own project. And similar to the CalVTP, we did find that they might be potentially significant and unavoidable. And we wanted to make sure that we highlighted that for the public, and that we made sure that any of the impacts for the Greater Novato project were consistent with the findings of the CalVTP EIR. So the bulk of these impacts really do kind of come from pile burning or broadcast burning. We did look at each of the activities that were being looked at and to make sure that they were considered in the CalVTP EIR. Our largest source of emissions, as is highlighted in the PSA, would be the up to 92 acre broadcast burn area that may occur. And that would generate the largest emissions, and it could potentially, in fact, would likely exceed during just that short time frame, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District annual significant thresholds, and could also potentially expose people to toxic air contaminants or objectionable odors. The broadcast burn, we anticipate could take up to 5 days, 1 day per burn unit, and in a similar fashion, although in smaller scale, pile burning could also occur, and if it were to occur on several days, or if there were enough piles that were burned at one time, you could also potentially exceed those emissions. So those were the different items that we looked at, and wanted to make sure that we were making a good analysis. One thing that I did want to just point out, that the CalVTP did sort of grapple with the idea that while the treatments themselves do result in emissions, reducing catastrophic fires also could substantially reduce emissions as well. But how to kind of make that comparison, or think about like offsetting some of the emissions that happen from your vegetation treatments, is really challenging, because it's hard to quantify where and when and how much emissions would happen in a catastrophic fire until after the fact. So they acknowledge this, but they didn't quantify it to say that they would not have a significant and unavoidable impact, because they just really couldn't quantify it in an apples to apples way to make that determination. So this slide really notes that while we acknowledge a potentially significant air quality and greenhouse gas impact, there's still a number of measures that are incorporated to reduce these impacts as much as feasible. And they're listed here. A lot of them have to do with the burning, such as making sure that you're meeting all required regulations, getting any appropriate permits for those burns, and also getting a smoke management plan. But in addition to the measures that specifically look at the burning, which are the highest source of emissions, there's also a few measures that look specifically at reducing emissions from other vegetation treatments, including making sure that your equipment is meeting EPA's vehicle standards, and also moving toward electric equipment where it's feasible. So sort of just trying to encourage other ways of reducing your emissions as well. But we do recognize that despite all the measures, including here, there's still the potential for a significant and unavoidable impact, and that it is within the scope of the CalVTP EIR. I'll pass it back to you, Ann.
Great, thank you so much. So with all of this analysis and with the CalVTP program EIR behind us, The findings really agree with the conclusions of the PSA and addendum that most impacts would have a less than significant or no impact at all. Some impacts to, various resources. We would be implementing mitigation measures to reduce those impacts to a less than significant level. Some air quality and greenhouse gas impacts indicated on the previous slides could potentially have a significant and unavoidable impact. And the MWPA agrees with the Board of Forestry's judgment that of the Cal VTP program EIR, that the benefits of the project outweigh the potential unavoidable significant impacts. So a note about public outreach here. As I mentioned previously, the Cal VTP programmatic EIR, one of the streamlining benefits of that program is that you do not have the extensive public comment periods that you would with a new environmental impact report. However, we believe in transparency and we really like to involve our stakeholders and residents. And so we have been reaching out to environmental stakeholders, discussing this project in our regular meetings with environmental stakeholders. We also hosted a public workshop in November of 2022 and sent out well over 5,000 postcards to residents in the project area to make sure as many people as possible knew about the project and could join us at that public meeting. And we'll also be hosting another public meeting in May on the 24th to discuss this project again and how implementation might look moving forward, especially for the first year or two. We've also been communicating with Firewise communities and various agencies. We hosted a meeting with agencies in the project area in Novato, with regulatory and resource agencies such as the water boards and wildlife as well. And then we reached out according to our requirements to tribes, the federally recognized tribe in the area. And we also have been open to any and all inquiries on this project. We'd love to talk about it and would love to keep talking about it. Mike's going to talk a little bit about that first year of implementation here.
Right. So the first step in implementation are the in-depth field reviews looking for rare plants and cultural resources. For rare plants, that has to be done 3 times. So we identified what we think is the priority for the first year or two. How much we get done is partly has to do with funding. So the red line there shows areas that we're hoping to do in year 1 and 2. The red segments as well as the blue. Our coming fiscal year work plan, Novato's committing about $500,000 for the implementation of this plan, and we've applied for a CAL FIRE grant of $5 million. In addition, California Conservation Corps North Bay received a Forestry Corps grant that's dedicated to this project, to the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Breaks of about $400,000. So that they will be good partners for us on that project. We've sent out for the neighborhood folks adjoining these project areas, we've sent out 800 letters. We're harvesting right of entry agreements. So that's allowing us to go out, in many cases, just to go meet with landowners on the ground where their parcel goes up the hill beyond their landscaped area within the fuel break. So the work lands on both public land and open space and on private properties as well.
Great, thank you, Mike. So today before the board, we present a resolution doing all of the things necessary in order to approve the project and acknowledge the results of the environmental compliance process. So by approving the project and the resolution, the board is making certain findings of fact, adopting a statement of overriding considerations and a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan associated with the project-specific analysis for the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break, and approving the Greater Novato Fuel Break. And with that, we're ending our slides here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. Thank you to Mike and Emily also. Very thorough update and very extensive report. A lot of pages there. So thank you. Thank you for a thorough report. So we're going to open it up to questions now. Barbara, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I did read through as much as I could of all the materials, and this really helped sort of verify what I thought through my reading. But one question I have that maybe I missed it because there were a lot of pages is on the cultural resources. I see that you reached out to the Grayton Rancheria and they didn't respond. And as we know that there will be no maps of where known cultural resources are. That's all confidential. So what I didn't see was if you come across remains or other resources, and this is where I probably missed it. Maybe it's part of the SPRs or the MMs, that you will stop work and immediately get an archaeologist to guide the work. So I'm sure I missed that in all those pages, but could you maybe just elaborate a little bit?
Sure. And I don't have that in front of me at the moment, but I can pull that up. And I'm guessing that Emily probably has that in front of her right now. That is addressed in the SPRs and mitigation measures. And also we have that in our project design and implementation features as well, both known resources and also unexpected discoveries as we work. So Emily, are you able to pull up that language?
You know, if you're not, I trust that
Okay.
you're saying that you would be stopping work and get an archaeologist. That was my only concern because I didn't see that. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely.
They're just, I'll just reiterate that there are, I think it's 6, is it? Nope, 7, 8 cultural resource specific SPRs, which includes training. So the first thing we'd want to do is make sure that everybody's trained so they know what they're seeing if they're out in the field and they can stop. And then there are several different types of treatments, including flagging or avoiding, depending on what were found. And you also, depending on what's found, you know who you have to bring in. So for example, if something is historical, you would bring in maybe your archaeologist. If it were prehistorical, you'd want to make sure that you bring in any Native American monitorings that were needed if the work were to continue in that area. So we do definitely have SPRs specific to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bruce?
Hi, yep. Gosh, Bruce Goins here. First, I want to compliment and thank Ann, Mike, Emily, and the Vibrant Planet team in putting this document together. As Mike said, he's been at this for decades. I too did this work for decades, and this is simply spectacularly thorough and environmentally responsible analysis on anticipated work. So my compliments go to the team. Just a couple of items that I find interesting. One is you made the statement that the Marin County CWPP has completed and documented, I think in 2021, a parcel by parcel risk assessment for every single parcel in Marin County. So we know who's very high and high or medium and low at risk. Presumably, and that analysis was a product of looking at the vegetation adjoining the parcels and then the age of the structure on the parcels. But I'm assuming, and it's not stated anywhere, but that this work will reduce the very highs and the highs and the moderates down to low. Is that an accurate statement?
Emily, why don't you address that a little bit? And I'll mention that in a separate effort, we are looking at metrics associated with fuel reduction work happening, both in terms of on-parcel home hardening and defensible space and trying to quantify that benefit, the benefit to the homes and the communities. And we're also using that same methodology, which includes Embercast, and it's a really groundbreaking methodology to look at our shaded fuel breaks as well. Okay. And so that is part of a proposal for next fiscal year. So you'll see that as part of the next work plan to really model and quantify that benefit. Preliminary results for kind of that pilot, the practice session of looking at a project and really diving into that benefit was done for the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, and we did see a significant reduction in risk as a result of vegetation management activities taking part as part of that project. So we anticipate the same kind of benefits with a project like this, and would love to report out on that in the future. Emily, anything to add in terms of data and the methodology and for risk assessment and calculating benefit?
I think that you kind of hit it really well. We do have a lot of data in, I'm going to make a plug for attachment A, which is that report itself, which was the model. It does talk about the reduction. I can't say off the top of my head if every parcel was reduced from moderate or high to low, but it does look at each one of them and then kind of quantify would sort of like where do you really get the best kind of like worth, and are you able to reduce as many as possible too low for the amount of funds that you have. And it kind of gives you a trade-off to think like, here's where if I can only get so much funding, where should I be starting to really reduce as many as possible too low. But I think what Anne mentioned about doing that after the fact analysis to see like really quantify, look at how many we got to there is a great sort of follow on to this work.
Yeah, thank you. I just think it's an important point in articulating the shaded fuel break, what it is, why it is, and what it does, and it's also the front line for an intrusion. If a northeastern wind, November ignition coming at the green point or black point, this is your first line of defense, and that if you can stop fire from at that contact point with the homes that are immediately exposed, it's true that. We know that if a home doesn't ignite, then other homes don't ignite, and you have a controllable situation versus uncontrollable situation. So I look forward to that analysis. But again, there's one item in this that I find really curious, and it is the naturally occurring asbestos, the statement. And I think folks probably don't understand naturally occurring asbestos very well. Could you just elaborate on where asbestos originates and then how you're going to track that in your, not generating dust that will blow into communities and put people breathing the air at risk?
I can start with that, and Emily, go ahead, fill in whatever I miss here. But generally speaking, that applies to areas where you're really disturbing soil and rocks and serpentine areas, and we're not doing that. So I don't see that as a risk for this project. But it's an interesting thing that we don't think about very often. But Emily, is there more to add there?
I think the only thing that I would add is, as Anne said, it's really based on kind of like the underlying rocks and soil. And so we map those, and it was something that we presented for Greater Ross Valley when we did our second meeting and we talked about where work would be happening. We sort of showed the kind of the level of mapping that we do before the project happens to be able to make sure that we know where those could occur, and if they were to occur where vegetation is happening, we make sure to include any of the mitigation that's required.
Thank you. It just speaks to how thorough your analysis is, and I just want to say congratulations on a spectacular analysis. Thank you very much.
Other questions from board members? Julie, go ahead.
You indicate that you're removing lots and lots of invasives, and I'm wondering what steps you're taking to keep those invasives from returning. And I'm also wondering if there's a concurrent effort to plant native plants instead of invasives at the same time.
The controlling broom it takes a long time. But the great thing is the funding is out there to do the monitoring and to respond to each site. So that is a priority. I would say that across the whole MWPA, that the veggie managers are looking at that and incorporating. There's a lot of practices for how to control broom. That's the number one. It's not the only invasive, but that's the one that's vexing, and it's costly. But we have the resources. So for me, I'm thinking positioning now so that we can go, because it's going to be more than 7 years to control broom. We have to stay at it. If we take our foot off the gas, it comes back. So I think this is a great opportunity for someone who's done a lot of land management and found controlling broom a difficult thing. This is the best possible situation. So yeah, so it's monitoring and employing a number of practices. As far as replanting, sometimes it's hard to do that. Sometimes just actually removing the broom, the natural regeneration happens. You don't necessarily have to put plants in the ground. But there may be, habitats that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Other questions? I think Alexis, you had a question first, and Stephen.
Yes, thank you. I'll echo what's been said. It's a really thorough and impressive report from what I could tell, and appreciate all the context that you provided today. My questions have to do a little bit with, the plan looks great, but what happens when it's sort of being implemented? So one of my questions is, which procedures or kind of mitigation measures would you say are most vulnerable, in the sense that, the plan is most likely to be deviated from, or maybe even disregarded in a kind of worst case scenario? So just curious to see kind of where the risk lies, and those vulnerabilities are. And then the second question, very relatedly, is, how do we know when there's a vulnerability like that, and what kind of, ongoing monitoring? For some things, it's quite clear. For other things, like cleaning protocols for the, sudden oak disease pathogen, it's maybe less clear how that would be monitored on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'd say for this project, we'll be incorporating a lot of what we do for the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Field Break as well. Every Friday, we meet as a team, the folks who are managing crews in the field, and we go through every single requirement and how it went that week. And it's a great way to remind ourselves what all of the requirements are. And we fill out a form and we keep it in our database every week. And that also provides an opportunity to look at the maps, to look at the mapped resources in the project areas for the week ahead and plan ahead for that. So we're very active in the implementation, making sure that we're doing what we said we would do as we implement. So another component that really helps in that regard is all the training that we do. So for every new crew coming on, we've got a training in English and Spanish. We have pamphlets. We have an online training for those who weren't able to attend in person, both in English and Spanish. We work with a lot of contractors to coordinate, and there are a lot of phone calls back and forth. There's a lot of communication back and forth. And so we've also got a binder for the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Field Rig with kind of a cheat sheet in the front and all the resources they need to look up what the requirements are as they go and they're implementing in the field. So I totally agree. It's one thing to say you're going to do X, Y, and Z to protect resources. It's another thing to actually follow through and do it. So we've been working really hard to set ourselves up for success. So we're actually doing what we said we would do.
Thank you.
Stephen?
Great report, and it certainly blew away my preconceived conception that it's 5 guys with a chainsaw and a Bic lighter going out there to clear things. So really, really impressive and thoughtful. Kind of touching on Julie's question, presumably you're going to be going through a lot of private property or private residences to access the fuel break. Is there an education opportunity there for the residents in terms of vegetation management, doing what they can do about broom and other such things, and just sort of layering that into the approach?
Great question. In Novato, and I think it's true elsewhere, this is just the last layer, right? Starts with the home. I think we're all committed to that. So to the extent that in Novato, we have a team of wildfire mitigation specialists that go out and do that on the ground education. When we're making contact to get access for the fuel breaks, we always ask them, have you taken advantage of that? So we're always pushing that. Novato has a high number of Firewise communities. John's still here. So that's another venue for for getting out the word and doing education. So we're pretty active in keeping all of that connected. Yeah, so I think that's great. We try to integrate that. And the last layer is the chipper program. So we try to hit the neighborhoods all together. They pick a neighborhood, they saturate it with home evaluations. We offer chipper days, and ultimately we hope to be able to time the fuel break work in that same neighborhood, so we're visible up and down, and it's a lot of opportunity for interaction with neighbors.
Well, you almost stole my next question. So is there a correlation, or do we know yet? Is there a correlation between a large project like this and an uptick in both chipper requests or chipper usage and grants in an area where suddenly people get sensitized? And we need to begin to anticipate that as we budget out in future years when we have these kind of projects. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, our chipper program got really busy. This is independent of the JPA wide chipper program. We got a lot of material out, mostly through the connections we made in the neighborhoods. So we do a home evaluation, we get a phone number and an email, and then we come back and say, oh, we've got a chipper day coming. So yeah, it's building for sure. And also now we're doing home visits to get access to, people's parcel behind their landscape to build the fuel break. And that's been really rich, and an opportunity, as I said, to sell our home evaluation, because we do believe, home hardening first.
Well, maybe that's a follow-up with staff and maybe a future finance committee meeting to kind of see if there's a way of beginning to document that and anticipate it. The human power that goes into this, how large is the commitment of people and crews and things like that? Because I think that would be an interesting piece to also share with the public as we go through this, the old your tax dollars at work kind of idea, but the idea that we're generating a lot of work for a lot of people, I think is worth tying into our communication. So I'm just curious if there's any sense of that scope of person power going into it. And if the answer is no, that's fine. Yep.
I think there's a lot of good initiatives going on. There's CCNB as a training organization, and they are building their capacity in response to the work that's ongoing. The private side, there's a lot of contractors that are building up a workforce, tree companies, and the Fire Foundry, I think, is a super great model where giving the opportunity for underserved people to get into the business at whatever shade of it that they're interested in, but building their understanding so it's more broad than just being a firefighter or a fuels crew person, that just to understand the environment, the environmental process, the kind of protections that are going on, the greater fire risk, the connection to climate change. All that's going on right now. It's actually pretty neat to see.
Thank you. Other questions, Tom?
If I understand correctly, year 7 of this project will coincide with year 10 of Measure C, which means that's the expiration of our mandate. I want to make sure that we've got a plan for capturing and keeping the data that we acquire in the course of both the Novato project and the Ross Valley project, where I assume there are some commonalities, and whether this data might be usable for a future, possibly renewed Measure C or another entity that might succeed us, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, or that we can use historical data without all of the intensive labor that's been required to build out these projects. I just want to make sure also that the data between, say, Ross Valley and Novato isn't siloed, and that each project can benefit from the work that went into prior projects.
Yeah, thank you for the pitch for the GIS program. Appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the purpose, is to make sure that all of the different efforts that we're taking on and that we're participating in are not siloed, and they speak to each other and inform each other. Absolutely agree that we need to kind of write down our methods and record that in our templates and all of that, so that this is not just this is how Ann does it. This is communicated, and we're working together, and we're sharing that, so nobody has to reinvent the wheel. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And can I add one thing?
Yes, absolutely, please.
I just wanted to add that like this CEQA document also, we're anticipating it having a long lifespan. So it might, 7 years in the future, it could still be accurate. And even if a different lead agency came and they wanted to do a smaller project, but they wanted to use this CEQA document, they could do a review to make sure the conditions are the same, the mitigation measures still apply, and they could do that. So it's really, you're spot on. Having it kind of living, having other people being able to take advantage of it is very important.
Yeah, I would think of that as non-project specific data that's reusable and doesn't become stale or is easily updated, and might help us to avoid the intensive ramp up that it has taken to get both the Ross Valley and Novato projects up and running.
Thank you, Tom. Other questions? Go ahead, Julie.
So you mentioned that this is a 5-year project. And so after 5 years, does that mean that we don't have to do anything else in Novato?
So 5 years to do the initial implementation. Yeah, this is ongoing. And 7 years from now, I don't think we'll be out of this fire situation. So I agree with remarks about, being able to marshal the information to convince folks to renew. I think it's really, really important.
And just to add to that, I think we'll be able to better report kind of how we're doing and the impact that we're having on wildfire risk in individual communities and the county, the JPA as a whole. And I think that we're working towards that in terms of defining what our metrics are and how we're going to be reporting that out to the public. And so stay tuned. I think you're going to see a lot of activity around metrics and reporting that and creating a dashboard on our website so that we're communicating all of that to all of you and all of the communities that we're benefiting and to the public in general. So I think you're going to see a lot more on that soon.
Great. Bruce?
Hi, just one other maybe clarifying point. In the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break and some other projects, we've had this discussion previously that when we go in and establish our initial footprint for a hazard mitigation project, that you also populate the anticipated maintenance timeframe, and that this 3,400 and so acres, some of it's brush, some of it's grass, some of it is hardwood and other, but you're anticipating future footprint for maintenance, and you're actually populating future project work plans in your work plan. You're actually populating future work. And as to Tom's question about building upon what we currently have, you're actually establishing the footprint of the infrastructure that we need to maintain. And you are indeed anticipating what needs to be done. And I think that's accurate. But then the second question is regarding CEQA and maintenance activities. What is the future CEQA burden associated with assessment of maintenance and upkeep of this infrastructure?
Yeah, those are all really great questions. One, for all of our projects, we make sure to incorporate future maintenance into the environmental compliance processes so that we're covered there as much as we possibly can be, because once we initiate the establishment of a shaded fuel break, we want to maintain that over time. And it's that's something that will be up to the voters in a few years. But I think if we demonstrate why we need to continue maintaining these, there's a really good story to tell about why Measure C or the next iteration should continue. As you might expect, the first couple of work plans and annual budgets for the MWPA have really included a lot of new projects, new footprints, new polygons on a map. And we're shifting away from that, really. We're shifting from the new projects to maintenance of existing projects or continued implementation of existing projects. And so you're going to see that in the next fiscal year work plan and budget that will be on your agenda next month. And that's really part of the maturing of this organization, isn't it? It's, you know, in the beginning, we've got this funding source, we have all of this need. Let's draw some lines on a map and get some work on the ground. And now we're moving into the, okay, these are the areas that we maintain for the betterment of, for public safety and for ecological reasons. And there may be additional funding sources where we can add to that footprint as we go. But you'll definitely see kind of a tapering off of new projects being proposed. So it's an interesting part of the conversation and kind of evolution of this organization. I'm not sure, did I get everything that you asked? Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. Again, thank you on a spectacular job, you and your team. Mike, thank you so much.
Any additional questions? And just two, I want to ask you, and you can be brief, but I think it's important to bring it up. Targeted herbicide use. We talked about that yesterday and you gave me a pretty clear answer. Wondered if you could share that. And then the ESP group and other environmental groups, just generally telling us the outreach that we've done to them about this project.
Sure. With regard to outreach, just a lot of really positive feedback from the environmental stakeholders that we've been meeting with. The approach from my end is to communicate early and often so that we are reducing the potential for surprises. So we've been talking about this project here and there, at least for many months, and then talked again on Monday and received a lot of really positive feedback about this document and the effort in general. So that was great. And then regarding targeted herbicide use, I'll let Mike answer that a little bit, but a lot of that is very targeted, you know, cutting broom and painting the stump so that it doesn't grow back in place. But Mike, do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, I think largely we're for broom management because we have resources. We're doing a lot of uprooting of broom and not having to paint stumps. So we're trying to reduce how much we do. It's absolutely is using herbicide for broom control makes it much more cost effective, more efficient. But we're also treating other species like eucalyptus and acacia and without the use of targeted herbicide applications, we won't be able to remove them. So it's kind of an essential ingredient for some of the work that we're doing.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll take this to the public now. No one in the chamber wants to speak on this item. Martina, anyone online?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak
sorry.
on,
You didn't stand up quick enough. So welcome to the podium.
please hold. We will actually go to public speakers in the room and then we will return to our remote attendees.
Thank you, Martina.
Yeah, Dennis, I was one of those 5 guys with a chainsaw. They fired that down, but we had
Testing.
There you go. Would you tell us your name just for
Yeah, I'm John Hanson
Thank you.
I live in Marin Valley and run the Firewise program there, one of the leaders at least, and also on the board with Fire Safe Marin. And yeah, I just wanted to say really that this, I've been involved with this sort of work, peripherally at least for many years. And, I've seen many CEQA compliance statements and reports. This is by far the best and most complete and that I have ever seen. I'm just totally blown away by the detail and the complexity of this report. It's just absolutely excellent. And I'm really looking forward to, to seeing this in action. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Martina, now we can go to anyone online.
And if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break Project and CEQA compliance item, please raise your hand in the reactions or press star 9 if you're joining by phone. And so it does look like we have two comments. We have one from Larry Minikis and the other from Lori Ozone. We'll go ahead and start with Larry Minikis. Sir, you should be able to deliver your comment at this time, and you do have a limit of 3 minutes.
Yes, good afternoon all. And I would just like to briefly mirror Director Goins' comments on what a terrific, thorough job you all have done. And I really appreciate the work, the care, the observation, all that is going into this. And furthermore, the director's questions and comments have been terrific as well. And to that, just thank you all. And that's it.
And it looks like we now have a comment from Lori Ozone. Lori, you should be able to deliver your comment at this time, and please be advised that you have a limit of 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much for this report and for the presentation. It's really fantastic. I really have a question as opposed to a comment, if I may. I wanted to go back to the invasives and wondering what was the thinking around eradicating blackberries. Is there a specific plan for this? Is there a plan to, cut the blackberries or to actually remove them?
Do you have anything else you want to comment on before we go to the staff? Answer the question?
No, I don't have any other comment.
Okay, thank you.
So, Lori, it depends on where it is. There are some neighborhoods that have a creek that's chock full of it, and we'll be removing it by hand and chipping it, taking it to recycling center. Some areas where it's flat, we can use equipment, a masticator, and chip it in place. So I hope I'm answering your question. It's we're making it go away in one fashion or another. But again, blackberry, like broom, is it's going to haunt us. So this is where this is permanent infrastructure. So we need to come back and maintain conditions. So.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, Martina?
And if there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 if you're joining by phone. And sir, there are no additional comments. I did just want to alert the board that Director Gabe Paulson has joined us remotely due to just cause under Brown Act as modified by AB 2449. He did have childcare posed an unexpected barrier to his in-person participation this afternoon. Director Paulson, if you are able, sir, can you please let us know if you have anyone in your room who is over the age of 18 for our records?
I do not.
Okay, and so there are no additional comments and we can proceed.
Thank you, Martina. Before we bring it back to a vote, I want to go to Megan and see if she wants to add anything to this item and just confirm that we're clear on Gabe being remote.
No, thank you. Martina did it perfectly. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're going to come back to the board for a motion on this item, and I think it would be acceptable to just move the recommendation. Bruce?
I'd like to make a motion that the board adopt the attached resolution regarding findings of fact, overriding considerations, mitigation monitoring, and the PSA, and approve the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Brick Project.
Okay, second. Thank you. Catherine Donahue seconds. Bruce Goin moved. All those, we have to do a roll call. So thank you. Go ahead, Martina.
And starting with Bolinas, I do not believe Director Molesworth has joined us for the afternoon. For Mill Valley, Stephen Burke.
Yes.
For the city of San Rafael, Director Kurtz is not here with us this afternoon. For the city of Larkspur, Director Paulson.
Yes.
For Inverness Public Utilities District, Director Donahue.
Yes.
For Kentfield Fire District, Director Evergettis.
Yes.
For Marinwood Community Services District, Director Shea. For Novato Fire District, Director Goins.
Aye.
For Sleepy Hollow Fire District, Director Finn.
Aye.
For Southern Marin Fire District, Director Hilliard.
Aye.
And for Stinson Beach Fire, Director White, I do not believe is here. For Muir Beach, I do not believe Director Jeschke is here. For the town of Corte Madera, it does not appear that Director Casisa is here. For the town of Fairfax, Director Kohler.
Aye.
For the town of San Anselmo, Director Feynman.
Yes.
For the town of Ross, Director McMillan.
Aye.
And for the county of Marin, Director and President Rodoni.
Aye.
And sir, it does look like we have a unanimous vote of all in attendance.
Thank you all. So we're going to move now to item 9, committee reports. And just reminding everyone, we're at 4:46. So if you can be as brief as possible. First item is Fire Safe Marin report.
And sir, we do not have Fire Safe Marin here in person, and they did not have anything additional to add to their report.
Did we miss anything, Mike? No. Okay, thank you. Yes, Catherine.
I saw on the IJ today an advertisement from Fire Safe Marin about Chipper Days. So it's just at the beginning of what you're saying, the program is opening, and there it was. So thanks.
Yep. And a lot of the Fire Safe Marin ads are popping up if you look at the paper online also. So. Okay, so no Fire Safe Marin report today. Item B is the Advisory Technical Committee. I believe we have someone that's going to give us an update.
Yes, thank you, Director, and members of the board. I'm Ruben Martin, Chair of the ATC Committee. As Ms. Kraylock already mentioned earlier in her report, the ATC Committee began meeting at the end of last calendar year, and I've been meeting monthly to try to work through our 23-24 work plan. And I believe that the plan that we've recommended moving forward to the Operations Committee is a solid plan. I want to thank members of the ad hoc committee. We were able to create a 5-member committee with representation from each zone that were able to really dig down deep into both overall projects that are JPA wide and local project wide. And I believe that the product being presented before you should be before you, I believe, hopefully at the next meeting. Is something that we can all be proud of. So with that, that's out of my report.
Thank you, Chief. So any questions of Chief Martin? All right. Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you, sir.
Item is items. Oh, we want to go to the public. Sorry, I missed out the public on this one. Martina?
And I will go ahead and bring Chief Martin back over. If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the Advisory Technical Committee report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, it does not look like we have any hands.
All right. Since there are no board questions, we'll skip board comments and go to Operations Committee report. I believe Jesse, Chief of Stinson Beach, is going to be online. Jesse Perry.
Hi, folks. It doesn't look like my camera's working, but Jesse Perry, Chief of Stinson Beach Fire, to provide a brief update from the MWPA Operations Committee. On April 12th, the committee received a draft of the work plan from staff, and we're awaiting the recommendations from the Advisory Technical Committee in our next meeting. Over the next few weeks, we're going to continue to meet in ad hoc committee meetings and regular sessions to finalize the work plan recommendations. And we're aiming to have this recommendations to the body before your folks' next meeting, I believe. End of report. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Jesse. Any questions of the Operations Committee? Looking forward to that document coming forth next month. Thank you, Jesse. And have a question? Oh, I will, yeah. And just want to mention, Jesse ran a very successful tsunami evacuation event last weekend where he had over 50 people check through his checkpoint. So very successful. Going to the public now for public comment on this item.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the Operations Committee report, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining us by phone. And sir, there are no hands for comment.
Okay, any questions from the board? All right, thank you, Jesse. So we're going to go to item 10, which is informational items, a series of minutes from the last month or two. Any questions or anyone want to talk about any of those? All right. Anyone want to request anything for future agendas? Go ahead, Catherine.
Was there anything on the citizens oversight?
There was a minutes, but there was no report today.
Okay.
So. Bruce.
Hi, yeah, I'd like to suggest, I the privilege of reviewing the one TAM regional priority plan that has been drafted out. It's a little over 1,000 pages, all in with appendices. It is nearly revised, and that Anne and Mark, if you would please track the progress of that, and as it's ready for release to the public, it is an essentially critical document that parallels work that we're doing here. And so I suggest that we track that and get Danny Franco here to give us a thorough summary of that report and the implications both for Marin County and for MWPA and for the funding possibilities coming along with it.
Thank you. Any other suggestions? All right, hearing none, I'd like to call for the adjournment, and we'll see everyone May 18th. Thank you so much.
Thank you.